Jay Naidoo, the issue is whether or not unions are able to adapt to the situation, deal with the conditions as they prevail today.
Well, I think today, there are a lot greater challenges than there were in our time, and I'm not sure if James will concur with me. I mean, in our day, although it was dangerous, things were a lot clearer. It was black and white. It was whether you were, for apartheid or against apartheid. And so if you look at it today, there are a lot more gray areas that make it much more difficult to interpret and navigate the political minefield. So, if I go back and I think to the challenges that face us today, even work organization has changed. One of the challenges of, say, Marikana is a large number of those workers, almost a third, are subcontracted.
Sure.
That means there's not one workforce. So the nature of work organization has changed. Unions are today confronted in many workplaces by not just one employer, but several employers. And I think these are all the challenges that face us today, and there are no easy solutions to this. I do think that one of the big challenges, as reflected in Marikana, is that large parts of industry, and particularly mining, have remained untransformed. They have not restructured themselves and still operate on the basis of a cheap labor system, on high profitability, and in a way in which ignores the social conditions under which workers work. And that is what has caused this eruption of anger and now the violence that one sees escalating in the country around labor relations. And lastly, I would say is that it's not only undesirable and almost impossible to separate politics from workplace issues as it was in our time. I think the same situation applies today. The Minister of Planning, Trevor Manuel, if you look at the Rustenburg area, this was one area where we could have created the non-racial South Africa in the way we constructed a new town that incorporated the social environment around the growth of the platinum industry. We failed to do that. And all of these things have come back to haunt us.
Sure. All right, I'm going to come back to you. You're raising a number of very important issues. But Mr. Motlatsi, another issue perhaps that's changed today compared to the period when Mr. Naidoo led COSATU and yourselves as well, is that the employer is a totally different guy. The employer is your former comrade.
Well, let me say, I would agree partly with what Jay said during our time that it was either you are with us or with apartheid. But if you look at it today, for instance, the unions has freedom. You can organize workers all over the country without fear and or threat. Now, let me go to Marikana as well, where I think Cyril's name was a center for attacks.
Yeah, and that's why I'm raising this issue, because some people are saying that it's difficult for the unions to deal head on because at a political level you also meet. So how do you relate to each other?
No, but if you look at, for instance, look at COSATU. COSATU is in alliance with the African National Congress and SACP. But COSATU is an independent entity. When they address the issues which are affecting workers, they don't compromise COSATU's independence, as well as the National Union of Mine Workers. The National Union of Mine Workers, when they are addressing the issues concerning the mine workers, they don't care whether the shareholder there is a former leader of the National Union of Mine Workers. For instance, if you look at the share in which Cyril's company is controlling on Lonmin, it's far less than 20%. And it's just unfortunate that Cyril it's a shareholder there, and it's Cyril, and time and again, any person who would like to attack will attach Cyril's name and saying, look, if Cyril was prepared to buy a bull at 19.5 million, how can he not agree with 12.5 thousand? But Cyril, as a business person, is also a farmer. That 19.5 million has got nothing to do with what is happening in Marikana. However, the reality of the matter is that some of our problems we are facing in South Africa today, we are the victims of our own successes. Because if you look at, you wouldn't even think that just unorganized workers could put a demand to the company and the company agree to that. That is the space which has been created by the unions, because the National Union of Mine Workers is not the first strike, illegal strike in Marikana. We do have that experience. It's an experience we were running with it throughout the formation of the National Union of Mine Workers. If you look at, for instance, the opportunists will take advantage. I wanted to make an example about what was happening in the 80s. The mine workers will boycott the liquor outlets for good reasons. Some of the leaders who will be leading those boycotts will open the shebeens outside the hostels. And when management has responded positively to the demand, they will increase the demands time and again, so that they must prolong the boycott in order for them to gain some profit.
Okay.
If you look at Marikana, for instance, today, go back, I can tell you there are those who benefited out of that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, more than 40 people lost their lives. The people who decided to go and get a witch doctor, I can tell you the report will be with me to say they gained. If you look at people who were paying between 1,500 to a witch doctor to 500. Now you can imagine more than 3,000 people paid between 1,500 and 500. How much that witch doctor pocketed, and how much.
Sure. Those are specific issues, and I think people will raise them on the line. But another issue that I would like to go back to is the issue that was raised by Mr. Naidoo. Or perhaps I should ask, I should go back to you, Mr. Naidoo, about the dynamism of leadership then in addressing issues such as the 10,000 or so contract workers at Glonman. We're talking about 26,000 who are full-time, but you've got about 10,000 who are contract workers. Is there dynamism within the union movement to be able to address those, to be able to give solidarity to those workers too?
Yes, and I think that COSATU has taken a very strong stand against labor broking, and I think that the problem really goes beyond labor broking, is the extent to which the collective bargaining system is being undermined as a result of the casualization and the subcontracting. And so what you're having is here, in this instance of Marikana, rock drill miners now, or operators going on strike as a category of workers. So I think that, and one has to get back to this point, that the work that they do is extremely dangerous and extremely strenuous. This is 3 kilometers down into the earth. I think that the miners are entitled to a fairer share of the profits that are being made at these mines. And we're not just talking of when there's a downturn, but also if one looks over a period of time, these mines have been extremely profitable. So I think that issue of wages is a substantial issue that has to be centrally addressed in the mining sector. We cannot continue a situation of a mining sector that remains extremely profitable on the basis of a cheap labor system that was part of apartheid. So that has to change. The second is that I think that part of what James is saying is absolutely true, because I think what's happened is, in the context of freedom that we won in 1994, trade union leaders are not as involved in community matters as they were in our time. We had a slogan that said, it's not only impossible, but also undesirable for us to separate our fight for rights on the shop floor from our broader struggle for political freedom and the rights of our communities. And in the context of a complete breakdown of organization at a community level, of political organization, of civic movements, of women's organizations, and trade unions that are no longer as active as they were in the communities. Those communities have become open ground for anyone, like we are seeing. And I think that part of the challenge of COSATU is to rebuild that leadership, not just on the shop floor, but also in the community, so that we are closing the avenues for people to cause divisions between ourselves. And so I think the Marikana, or what's happening in the service level delivery protest, is an indication of weakness of our organizations at a civic level, so that people feel they have no voice, that the leaders are not listening to them. And the only way they get the leaders to listen to them is to use violence, burning down public libraries. And violence then becomes a language. So part of this violence that we are seeing across the country, protesting about delivery or about wages, is because people feel disempowered. And I think that is a bigger political problem. It cannot be solved by just throwing police and using the police as the front line.
It's interesting.
Solve a political problem.
Sure. Mr. Naidoo, it's interesting because one analyst said to me that as far as is concerned, the issue of solidarity, there's waning solidarity across the board, and therefore violence becomes another way then of enforcing that solidarity, because there's no solidarity, whether you look at it from a shop floor point of view or you look at it from a living social condition point of view.
I absolutely agree with that, because I think it's like each person for themselves. And let us be very honest about this. Let us not discount the fact that many of the mining bosses all across the world in the economy are earning hundreds times what the people actually doing the production is. That issue of the gap between the bonuses and the incomes of the top of these companies and what the workers are earning is obvious today. It is open. It's in the media. So when I look at it and I have to work 12 hours a day holding a drill at 3 kilometers under the ground, which is devastating to my health, and then I look at someone that's sitting up there at the top of the company earning 300 times what I'm earning, of course that's going to breed an anger. So the issue of the gap between the top of the company, the management, and the that are actually doing the production is a subject of political discussion in our